Well, use enough gun, great advice, especially if you're after dangerous game. But how much is enough gun? Obviously, we all know you want a big heavy bullet that makes a big splash on target, and it's going to make a big splash on our shoulders too. And this is our balance point. At what point do we endure so much recoil that we start flinching and miss? As everyone knows, the bullet's got to get to the right place, regardless of how much power it has in it. So if we want to stop dangerous game like big bears and buffalo and hippo and elephants, we've got to have an adequate cartridge, an adequate bullet, and adequate aim. Well, tying it all together suggests we want to sort of balance it out toward the middle. The 375 H&H has, for a long time, been your sort of a minimum standard. If you want to hunt buffalo in a lot of African countries, you better have a 375 H&H at the minimum. But then the guys say that's maybe not quite enough power. We should step up. Do you want the recoil of a 500 grain bullet from a 470 Nitro Express or a 458 Lot? Maybe not. What is a good compromise? The 416s, specifically 416 Rigby, 416 Remington Magnum. Those are the two most popular 416 Magnums, and for good reason. They give you more energy and more power than the 375 H&H, but they don't recoil as much as the 450 Rigby, the 500s, all of those really big ones. So a lot of folks are now starting to run the 416s for their dangerous game work. But are we really gaining anything useful out of these? And if we do want to get one, which one is the more powerful, the better performer, more available, more cost affordable? Let's just dive into both of these and figure out which one we might want for our dangerous game rifle. Now, the 416 Rigby came out in 1911. It's got a big, long history. The 416 Remington didn't come out until 1989. But you can see they're almost the same length, but the Rigby is just a little bit longer at a maximum cartridge length of 3.750, whereas the Remington Magnum is at your standard 375 H&H Magnum length, for which you need generally a Magnum magazine or a Magnum length action at 3.6 inches. Notice how much fatter the Rigby is, 0.590 body diameter. That's getting pretty fat. This one's only 513, so it's 532 at the belt and the rim, but 513 at the body, so you can have a little bit smaller action and still contain that cartridge. Also, shoving it down into the magazine, because of the smaller diameter, you might get one more of the 416 Remingtons inside of a magazine than you can the Rigby's, so you have more quick firepower and ready to go. Now, you've got the belt issue with this one. I know a lot of people don't like belts, but I don't think they're any kind of a problem. My gosh, if that belted 375 H&H has been a standard for this many years on dangerous game, they're probably not going to use it if the belt interrupts the flow of the rifle in any way. So I don't have a problem with that, but if you don't like belts, the Rigby doesn't have one. The shoulder angle on the Rigby is 45 degrees. On the Remington, it's only 25 degrees. But gosh, guys, there's such minimal shoulder there. It really doesn't play a role. Obviously, it is stopping this one. The headspace on the Rigby is done with that 45-degree shoulder. It's not very wide, but it's sharp enough to easily do the job. And again, the belt is what's doing your head spacing on the 416 Remington. Twist rate 1 14 inches for both of these, kind of standard. You're not shooting long high BC bullets in either one of these. They're round noses, flat noses, maybe a weak spire point like this. Most of your shots are going to be fairly close. You're not trying to reach 400 yards. The maximum average pressure on the Rigby is only 52,000 PSI. That's a SAMI spec. And the SAMI spec for the Remington is way up at 65,000 PSI. And that is going to make significant difference in their performance. The average factory muzzle velocity that I've seen advertised for the 416 Rigby falls in at 2,370 feet per second. That's with that 400 grain bullet. In the Remington, it's 2,400 feet per second, a little bit faster. Again, same bullet. Now, hand loaders, of course, are going to say they can get more out of those, and they probably can. I looked at several manuals, Nosler Hornady, Norma, Swift, and Barnes, and look what I came up with. 2,516 feet per second was the top load in the Nosler manual. For the Rigby, 2,503 feet per second for the Nosler. Pretty close. Hornady's manual, 2,400 feet per second for the Rigby, 2,450 for the Remington Magnum. A little bit faster in the Remington. 2412 feet per second out of the normal manual for the Rigby, 2395 for the Remington. And the Swift manual had 2,474 feet per second versus 2,430 feet per second. So they are giving the advantage to the Rigby. Finally, the Barnes manual with those copper bullets, 2,580 feet per second for the Rigby, 2,500 feet per second, another advantage to the Rigby. So how are we getting this? With lots of powder. And this is where you kind of help make up your mind on these. The maximum powder grains in these loads for the Rigby, 104 grains of Reloader 22 powder, whereas there were only 81 grains of Reloader 15 powder required for the Remington Magnum to get within a few feet per second of the same performance. So you've got an advantage there in your powders. Now, what does this mean in the real world? I did some math real quick on this one. And out of 1 pound of powder, that's 700 grains, you're going to get 67 loads in your 416 Rigby, and you're going to get 86 out of the Remington Magnum. So if you're counting pennies, you know what powder's like these days. Even if you're not counting pennies, you're counting grains because it's so hard to find it. You might have an advantage in going to that Remington. Action size, I thought at first you're going to find very few rifles chambered for the 416 because of that fat cartridge. You need a good beefy action. But it turns out that a lot of American actions like the Winchester Model 70, for instance, can be opened up to handle this guy. So it's not as hard to find rifles as you might think. But again, you do have the consideration about the magazine capacity. Whether or not that's going to screw things up for you, I don't know. Something to consider, however. But in general, the Remington Magnum, I think, will be easier to fit rifles for that one because Remington made 700s in it. Winchester made the 70s in it. Ruger loaded it. I don't know who all else, but that just seems like it's a lot more common in American rifles. Whereas the Rigby, you're starting to think British rifles, like Rigby itself, some of those big ones. And we're going to get into those here real quick. Now, you want to consider recoil in these. And surprisingly, they are not the same. Even though they're shooting the same bullets at the same velocity, you're getting more recoil out of the Rigby. And that's because of the additional powder. Powder and bullet both are factored into recoil. So by pushing 20 grains more or so of powder, you increase the recoil. So in a 10-pound rifle, the Rigby is going to be generating 71.4 foot-pounds of energy, coming back your shoulder at 21.4 feet per second velocity. The Remington is a lot milder at 60.8 foot-pounds of energy at 20 feet per second. So a little bit easier on the shoulder with that Remington. Ammo costs averaging, well, I found a bunch of loads at $170 at the bottom up to $256 at the top for the Rigby Magnum. Pretty pricey stuff. The Remington was less expensive, but not what you'd call a bargain. $127 will get you 20 rounds at the low end, $176 at the top end. So neither of them is inexpensive to shoot. But hey, when there's a brown bear coming at you, or the big Cape Buffalo, the hunt of your lifetime, you don't want to be skimping a few dollars on your cartridges. You need what you need to get the job done. Now, what about rifles? Well, traditionally, of course, the 416 Rigby was made by Rigby of London. They still make them. They're beautiful rifles. I think Holland & Holland probably make them for you. Mauser itself, the Mauser 98, is still being made in Germany, and they're making some beautiful rifles in 416 Rigby. Park West Arms right here, that used to be Dakota rifles, and it's that same sweet Model 70 style controlled round feed action. They're building beautiful rifles in 416 Rigby as well as 416 Rem Mag. HS Precision in Rapid City, South Dakota will chamber and build rifles in 416 Rigby, and those are mostly, to my knowledge, all synthetic stock rifles. So you've got sort of a modern spin to it. Jarrett in South Carolina will load it, build rifles for it. And Heim, they do their express bolt action rifle up in British Columbia. Ralph Martini, a gun maker who just, every time I see one of his rifles at the Dallas Safari Club show or the SCI show, I just marvel. They are absolute gems. And Heim offers those, as well as their side-by-side, the 88B. That surprised me. Usually with the side-by-side, you're working with rimmed cartridges like the 470 Nitro, but they're offering it in the Rigby. Okay, and then the 416 Rem Mag, the Winchester Safari Express Model 70 is chambered for that. It's a factory option right now. It's just standard stuff. So it's about the only one I could find. Remington doesn't do it anymore. Ruger doesn't do it anymore. You can get Park West Arms to build you one, same as with the 416 Rigby. So you got either one there. And HS Precision as well. Jarrett will do it, and Blaser offers it. And I have used... Did I use it in a Blaser? No, that was a 458 lot. I shot the 416 Rigby in an original 416 Rigby Magnum. That was a sweet operation. Now, when you're talking about recoil, the first time I ever shot a 416 Rigby, the recoil got me. I was just not prepared for it. It didn't really knock me over, but it knocked me off balance enough that I did fall over. I stepped back to catch myself and twisted my foot on a rock and fell over. And there's this famous video out there of me doing it. You might want to check that out. Well, maybe we'll put a picture of it up here for you, give you a little snippet of it. But the point is, that is from a rank amateur, first shot with a new rifle kind of a deal. Once I understood what was going on, I found that I could control it. And we'll run some video here of another one I did on a 416 Rigby. This is a newly made model when they started making them again a few years ago that I got to test. And I worked with that to the point where I could send probably 4 or 5 rounds, just clean out that magazine downrange fairly quickly and control it. So it's easily controllable. You just don't want too lightweight of a rifle. And then the Remington Magnum, as I said, you got quite a bit less recoil out of that one. And I had it in a rifle that I shot a full magazine out of a while back just behind the barn to see how I could handle that. And that worked very well too. So the recoil is controllable with the right build of a rifle. You want the right stock shape and mass and all the rest of it, but it's definitely easy to control. Not as easy as a 375 H&H, obviously. That one just has a lot less recoil because it's a smaller bullet. 300 grains generally is the peak on that one. And a little bit less powder even when compared against the 416 because of the taper in the cartridge. But then the question becomes, if you can handle the recoil on any and all of these, are you getting enough gun when you're using a 416? And let's look at some energy things really quick. Since they're both essentially shooting the same bullets at the same velocities, they've got the same performance, and your velocities aren't really going to matter all that much. That's just a big part of the energy. That's what we want to be concerned with on dangerous game. So you're starting off with 5,332 foot-pounds of energy out of both of these. And they generally say 5,000 foot-pounds is what you're looking for in a dangerous game out setup. So there you go. And you'll hang on to, we'll say out to about 100 yards, you've still got 4,439 foot-pounds of energy. Plenty. And there's not a lot of dangerous game that you're shooting farther than that. You generally try to get in closer for maximum effect. And then if something is charging you and you need to stop it, it's going to be a lot closer. Now, you want to consider trajectories on these things because the 416 is still small enough that I think you can legitimately use it as your plains game cartridge. If you're over there hunting buffalo or any of the big stuff, and then you finish up and you want to hunt kudu and oryx and bushbuck or any of the smaller ones, can you use that same rifle? You know, it's getting to be a real hassle traveling with rifles, and it's a lot of us are starting to go over with just one rifle instead of 2 or even 3 or 4 as we used to in the old days. So this is viable if you change your sight setup. I would zero both of these for about 100 yards. That will give you a peak trajectory of about 1/4 inch above your point of aim at about 75 yards. So that's pretty much putting your bullet right where you're aiming so you get a precise shot on the brain or the heart of the big animal that you need to stop. That works great. But then, by the time you get out to 200 yards, you're dropping 5.5 inches. And then it gets to be a bit of a concern. But still, 200 yards is a pretty long shot over in Africa for a lot of this plains game. But in some of the more open habitats, you can sometimes have to take a lot longer shot than that. Re-zero your rifle. If you're done with the dangerous game setup, just re-zero to about 210 yards. I did that, and I found that my peak trajectory would be 3.2 inches high at 125 yards. Not too much for taking those big antelope over there. And then you're going to hold on to your flattish trajectory pretty well. And at 250 yards, you're only 3.5 inches low. So you've got a good dead on to 350 yards or 250 yards. And if you want to stretch it out to 300, you've got about 10 inches of drop. Hold on the back line, drop it in there. I think it's pretty viable. So that makes the 416, I think, about as viable as the 375 H&H, because that's always been considered a good option for everything. Long reach plains game as well. Yes, this one will shoot a little bit flatter, but this one will give you the bigger punch, and you'll be able to use enough gun. So, your choice, guys. Now, there are a couple more 416s out there. 416 Ruger, which is a 30-06 length cartridge. Pretty impressive. Pretty efficient too. And then there's the 416 Weatherby Magnum, which is probably outdoing both of these. If you're interested, let me know, and we might dive into those two another time. But for now, those are your two popular 416s you might want to consider for your African dangerous game hunting, or your Alaskan brown bears, or whatever else you think needs enough gun. Now, I started off by talking about a big splash. And the start of this show, we had several jugs exploding when they were shot with a big, powerful bullet. As we've often noticed, that water is a pretty good medium for testing bullets. You know, it's not the same as an animal, but they always say we're mostly water. What is it, like 90% water or something crazy? So water is a reasonable test medium for bullets. And a gallon of water for a bullet to penetrate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line like that suggests pretty good performance. A lot of penetration, a lot of power. Do you think that looked like enough power to handle a Cape Buffalo? Well, it wasn't a 416 that did it. I shot those jugs with the 375 H&H and a 300 grain bullet. So that gives you an idea of how much more powerful a 400 grain bullet would be out of a 416. So your choice, folks. I have found with today's modern bullets, the 375 H&H does just about anything I need it to do. But I can understand someone concerned about enough gun wanting to step up in power. And I think a pretty reasonable option are these 416s. Now, I have not taken game, to my knowledge, with a 416 Remington Magnum. I've shot it a lot. One time I was shooting on a range with friends, and I shot 20 rounds in a row at gallon milk jugs out at 100 yards just to see if I could aim and not flinch and hit them. And I literally gave myself a concussion headache from the repetitive shooting. That recoil actually builds up. Each shot really didn't hurt, but it built up enough to shake my brain, so you want to be careful about stuff like that. I have used the 416. I took a buffalo with one shot over in Zambia. And I have, I've taken an eland with one, and I have friends who have taken quite a bit of game with them. In fact, that gentleman that I hunted with in Africa recently used a 416 on a hippo. And that bullet, he shot a little bit low and didn't hit the brain, and the bullet passed all the way through the neck, deep into the chest, through the lungs and the heart, and well back into that animal. So he had plenty of power and punch to take that hippo. Now, that said, I've done just as well with the 375 H&H. I took my hippo with the 375 H&H, and I took buffalo with the 375 H&H, and my wife has taken a buffalo with a 375 H&H. So once again, the right bullet, the right shot, the right place, you can probably do it. But if you would like to have a little more insurance behind you on those big charging animals, yeah, 416 I think is your best option. I would prefer it over the harder kicking 458s, and it'll give you a little more juice than the 375. You get to make your choice. This is Ron Spomer once again signing off on Honest to Shoot Straight.